Hey, Joseph Berry, the scholar. So I want to go over a paper that I'm about done with, working on. Um, that I wrote for. It was intended for the Journal of Education Theory, something like that. Yeah, Journal Education Theory, right? And this is about critical explorations of building bridges as educational practice. So that was kind of the theme that it was submitted under. And I'm still talking about this term, alias modi facio, and I also introduced the term facultas marginum. And so I'm going to go over this paper in a few parts, but basically, the title for the paper is alias modi facio and facultas marginum. Needed material for the bridge of needed material for the bridge of epistemological expansion, connecting prevailing understandings of disability with the practice of education. I'll probably change the title; it's too long and wordy. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying here is that there's needed language to that there's language that's needed to better understand disability more accurately or more adequately in this, as I see it. Um, so I'll get right into it. I'll start with the first section, which is kind of an introductory thing. And what I'll do is I'll read, and then where clarification needs to be added, I'll pause and put that there. So I start by saying, in Plato's Republic, Socrates summed up his thoughts on what constitutes a proper guardian form of knowledge by analogizing learning and wisdom to music and poetic practice. Speaking to Glaucon, Socrates concluded, the person who achieves the finest blend of music and physical training and impresses it on his soul in the most measured way is the one we'd most correctly call completely harmonious and trained in music, much more so than the one who merely harmonizes the strings of his or her instrument. So in this article, I pose that terminology related to disability must be expanded if the educational bridge is to be realized between education and disability. Specifically, I contrast two generic terms, alias mode facio or AMF, and facultas marginum, with the term disability to demonstrate both the utility and the paradox presented by prevailing academic understandings of disability, such as those being developed by the Washington Group on Disability Statistics. So I'm going to use these generic terminologies here in this paper, basically to show why just the term disability is, I guess, inadequate in and of itself, right? So with with the way that prevailing understandings of disability are, they have there's a great utility in what they're trying to do, while at the same time there's also a paradox in the way in which they're going about it, which is, I would argue, the reason for the break. So just as a bit of background, in the academic world, there's been and kind of, well, there still is definitely a debate as to what is disability exactly and how to go about measuring it or determining not just who has a disability from a social perspective, but from a phenomenological perspective and that whole kind of thing. So that's what this is geared towards addressing. Um, Educational philosophers have discussed subjects related to disability from the beginning. Um, while Aristotle posed that an ideal society would be guided by philosophy kings. That's Aristotle. Yeah, right. Socrates is what I mean to say. Yeah, Socrates posed an ideal society by, I guess, guided by philosophy kings who were advanced in their skill to know every possible musical note. But I said that he bullishly strung the chord of parsimonious harmony in demonstrating his skill to know disability. What I'm trying to say is he reasoned too or prematurely, parsimoniously, um, in demonstrating kind of and understanding of disability. I'm referring to how you just kind of disabled, defective children in that time were thought to be invalid or otherwise had no place in a great society, right? And so what I'm saying there is that Socrates contradicts himself then right away, in that he says that we should try to develop an understanding of something to its fullest and really get into it, kind of mind, body, and soul before we come to conclusions, strum our guitar, if you will. Yet, when it came to the issue of disability, even though it's addressed, it's definitely not drawn out. It's definitely not. It's bullish and parsimonious, and it's not the way that he himself says we should have go about understanding things, right? And so I go on to say we might see Socrates' view of disability as an oversight, or even make excuses to the general sentiment of ancient Greek society, and that's fair enough. But I cringe at the degree of regularity that philosophers explain Socrates' notion of disability in this way. So that's pretty much what it's left at. So what I want to do is kind of bring attention back to that whole thing. So viewing Socrates' position as a simple oversight or as an expression of inherent societal norm of ancient Greece diminishes the beauty and arguably the truth of Plato's explanation of Socrates' Republic, right? It's again a contradiction where we're saying these things are great because this book is great, this creation is great because of the depth at which it kind of goes into things and how much it spins things around and gives room for philosophical insight. But then when it comes to disability, it's kind of like, yep, but that's kind of what it was. There's no spin, so that's kind of again paradoxical to what the reasoning is that makes Socrates' Republic great. So I go on though from there by saying that um, a proper form of epistemology, I think, can benefit from indigenous philosophers who are comfortable in the feeling of love for, or that we cannot know certain things, and that is we cannot expect what's at the locus of another's animate soul, or else we would paradoxically relinquish our autonomy to know to any degree. It's an argument that says we rely on the unknown to know things. It provides definition to say that we know things or don't know things, but there has to be a meaning. There has to be a limit. We can't know all things. Anyway, I'll keep going. So when we do those things to try to know everything, then we risk our ability to reflect reality accurately. So an uncontrollable urge to know all of the chords individually and in harmony with both your hand and mind is paradoxical, right? I can't play the chords and hear the chords through your fingers and your ears, if that makes sense, right? So Jordan Peterson describes this paradox as the tension between chaos and order, right? There has to be an amount of chaos and amount of order to know things, right? And he offered a notion, I like his kind of notion of what I'm getting at here is he asked a question in one of his videos. People ask, what would you do if you were God for a day? So if you were an omni-God, what would you do? And he responds with nothing. There would be, if you're all knowing and you're all powerful and you're all present, then it's problematic for even being. So how would you be omni God for a day, or an omni-God for any amount of time, what would you do? Well, you would have already done it. You wouldn't have any set of saying I'm going to. Then you're doing it. There's no bounds in kind of what it is. Well, what you would already know what you're going to do. You would know what's going to happen. The doing part of it would be paradoxical. It's impossible, right? And the reason I bring this up, these kinds of things, to say that there is an amount of paradox, not just in, I guess, understanding or how our brains work, but there's an amount of paradox in the whole notion of disability as well. It's a very strange thing that people are proud to be disabled, at the same time they want to be cured, and sometimes they don't. But my point is that even the word itself is a paradoxical word. Disability. We'll continue along those lines, but I'm making the point that there is an amount of paradox that exists in knowing, right? There's an amount of almost, kind of magic, and that same kind of paradox is extremely relevant when it comes to disability, right? And so I think this is important because as our world embarks on an age of knowing, that's marked both by expeditious advancement, right? Both with information and educational ability, right? With the influx of data and these computers and artificial intelligence in a way that our knowledge base is exploding right now. But that's so kind of amazing on one hand, but it's kind of dangerous too, because we're at a very infantile stage in understanding a very fundamental component of our own humanity, which is disability. So it's a part of being human from a core perspective, and yet we don't even know what that means and how to count it. And so I go on here to point more back to indigenous philosophers because they're more comfortable with paradox. Indigenous philosophers might rebuke Socrates' dismissal of persons with disability. For example, Cruz, Tanchik, and Hamilton claim that it's necessary truth that to be human, we must value all forms of animate life. I kind of start to touch on this, as each of us are dependent upon our ability to reflect the reality of one's animate experience. In making this claim, they also argue that Socratic approach to knowing often limit the epistemic value of things that are, paradoxically, by instead presupposing things to conform to a notion of what things should be. And so also Cruz, ETAL, I'm not sure the other ones were offhand, but Cruz and others in 2019 also seem to invite an amount of paradox and refute Socratic notions of philosophy, in that their dismissal of Socratic philosophy in this way seems, well, again, they're saying that that it's not right to, I guess, stop counting or stop looking to something that you're trying to know. And so I find that extremely interesting. Got black as hell. I better not get caught in no tornadoes out here. All right, so this brings me to my final point here, in that there's a proclivity for Western philosophy to cast reason as an instrument to subjective ends, right? And that's what Cruz says. In refuting that, kind of saying that the Socratic notion is, I guess, useless, then they're kind of erring in the same way. Episode 2. Hit play on the bottom below.